The moment I opened that white envelope on Tuesday morning, I knew Linda Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her corrupt little career. But what she didn't know was that I'd been secretly recording every illegal move she'd made for the past 6 months, and I was about to destroy her entire operation in front of the whole neighborhood. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. White envelope, HOA, letterhead, marked URGENTVIOLATIONNOTICE. I was drinking my coffee on the back patio when my wife Sarah handed it to me with raised eyebrows. "What did we do now?" she asked, half joking. I tore it open and nearly choked on my coffee. $5,000 in fines. $5,000 for multiple severe violations of community standards. My name is David Chen. I'm 38 years old, a software engineer, and I'd been living in Willowbrook Estates for 3 years without so much as a parking ticket. The violations listed were absolutely absurd. Unauthorized fence modification, $1,500. Landscaping non-compliance, $2,000. Exterior paint color violation, $1,000. Noise ordinance breach, $500. I read it twice, then looked around our perfectly maintained yard. Our fence was the original builder-installed white vinyl. Our landscaping followed the HOA guidelines to the letter. Our house was painted the exact approved shade of desert sand from their color palette. And noise violations? We were the quietest people on the block. "This has to be a mistake," Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. But I knew it wasn't a mistake. This was personal. Let me back up to how this all started. 6 months earlier, I'd made the apparently fatal error of questioning Linda Morrison, our HOA president, at a community meeting. I met Linda Morrison for the first time at a friend's housewarming party 3 years ago. She was the type of woman who commanded attention the moment she walked into a room. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She made a point of introducing herself to everyone, making sure they knew she was the HOA president. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she'd said to Sarah and me that night. "I'm Linda Morrison. I run our homeowners association. We have very high standards here, but I'm sure you'll fit right in." Even then, something about her tone made me uncomfortable. It wasn't welcoming, it was warning. The meeting that changed everything was about approving a $200,000 landscaping contract for the community entrance. Linda stood at the front of the clubhouse, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights, presenting the proposal like she was announcing the cure for cancer. "This beautiful renovation will enhance all our property values," she declared, gesturing at architectural drawings that looked more like a resort than a suburban entrance. "We'll have a stunning water feature, professional-grade landscaping, and elegant stonework that will make Willowbrook the envy of every community in the area." The drawings were impressive, I had to admit, but the price tag made me do a double take. I raised my hand. "Sorry, Linda, but could we see some competing bids? $200,000 seems steep for some plants and a fountain." The room went quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Linda's smile froze on her face like a mask. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I've been managing community improvements for 8 years. I think I know what's best for Willowbrook." "I'm sure you do," I replied calmly. "But the bylaws require 3 competitive bids for any contract over $50,000. I'd just like to see we're getting the best value for our money." Her face flushed red. "The contractor is my husband's company. Are you questioning my husband's integrity?" And there it was, the real issue. Robert Morrison. Landscaping was getting handed a no-bid contract worth more than most people's annual salary. "I'm not questioning anyone's integrity," I said. I'm just asking for transparency. The vote was postponed. Linda's proposal was eventually rejected when other residents started asking similar questions. She blamed me publicly, saying I'd undermined community progress with baseless accusations. That's when the harassment started. First, it was small things, passive-aggressive emails about certain residents who needed to remember their place. Then came the surprise inspections. Linda would show up with her clipboard and measuring tape, documenting imaginary violations that somehow never affected anyone else. She'd arrive at my door at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings, dressed like she was going to a board meeting with a clipboard and a camera. "Just doing my rounds, David," she'd say with that fake smile, making sure everyone's keeping up with community standards. She'd walk around our property, taking photos of perfectly normal things and making notes. Our mailbox was slightly off-center. Our garden hose was improperly stored when it was coiled neatly beside our garage. Our outdoor furniture was not in approved colors, even though it was standard brown wicker. But what Linda didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything from day one. See, my background in software engineering taught me the value of data. When Linda started her campaign against me, I installed security cameras around our property, completely legal and within HOA guidelines. I also started keeping detailed records of every interaction, every email, every supposed violation. More importantly, I'd gotten curious about Linda's background. A little digging revealed some interesting facts about her 8 years of community management. Linda Morrison had been involved in 2 previous HOA disputes before moving to Willowbrook. In both cases, she'd been forced to resign amid allegations of financial improprieties. But she'd never been formally charged, so she'd simply moved to a new community and started over. The morning I got the $5,000 fine notice, I called the HOA management company directly. "Hi, this is David Chen from Willowbrook Estates. I received a violation notice that I'd like to discuss." "Let me pull up your file," the representative said. I could hear typing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but I don't show any violations on record for your address." "That's strange. I have a letter from Linda Morrison stating multiple violations totaling $5,000 in fines." More typing. "Mrs. Morrison isn't authorized to issue violation notices. All fines must be processed through our office and approved by the board." "So this letter is completely unauthorized. I'd recommend bringing this to the attention of your board of directors immediately." That's when I knew I had her. I spent the next week gathering evidence. The fake violation letter was just the beginning. I requested copies of all HOA financial records, which by law they had to provide. I contacted the management company for documentation of Linda's authority. I even drove by Robert Morrison Landscaping's office to take photos of their fleet of trucks. What I found was a pattern of corruption that went back years. Linda had been issuing unauthorized fines to residents who opposed her. She'd been steering contracts to her husband's company without proper bidding. Most shocking of all, she'd been collecting money from homeowners for special assessments that were never reported to the management company. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed the perfect moment to use it. That moment came at the next HOA meeting, 2 weeks later. Linda called the meeting to order in her usual imperious style. She was wearing a navy blue blazer and had her hair pulled back in what I'd started thinking of as her authority bun. "First item of business," she announced, "is addressing recent violations that threaten our community standards." She pulled out a folder, my folder. "Mr. Chen has shown blatant disregard for our rules and has accumulated $5,000 in legitimate fines. If payment isn't received within 30 days, we'll be forced to place a lien on his property." Murmurs went around the room. Several neighbors looked at me with concern. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly widow who lived next door, actually gasped. I stood up slowly. Linda, could you tell the community which specific violations I've committed? She rattled off the same list from the letter, her voice gaining confidence with each item. And who documented these violations? I asked. I did personally, during my authorized inspections. Could you show us the photos and documentation? Linda hesitated. The documentation is on file with the management company. That's interesting, I said, pulling out my phone, because I called them yesterday. I dialed the management company's number and put it on speaker. Hi, this is David Chen again. I'm here at our HOA meeting with about 30 residents. Could you confirm whether you have any violation documentation for my address at 1247 Maple Lane? The representative's voice filled the room. No, sir. As I mentioned before, we have no violations on record for your property. The room erupted in whispers. Furthermore, the voice continued, our records show that Mrs. Morrison has been issuing unauthorized violation notices to multiple residents over the past 2 years. Linda's face went white. There must be some mistake. I stood up and addressed the room. There's no mistake, Linda. You've been running a scam. I pulled out a thick folder and began distributing copies to every resident present. What you're looking at is documentation of fraudulent fines totaling over $30,000, issued to residents who dared to question board decisions. You'll also find evidence of no-bid contracts awarded to Morrison Landscaping, owned by Linda's husband. Linda tried to interrupt. This is slander. You can't. Page 3, I continued, shows bank deposits Linda made to her personal account from HOA special assessments that were never reported to our management company. The room was dead silent now. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Page 5 documents 12 instances where Linda threatened residents with liens and foreclosure for violations that don't exist in our community guidelines. Board member Janet Torres stood up. Linda, is this true? Linda's authority mask had completely cracked. These documents are taken out of context. I was protecting our property values. David has been undermining my authority from day one. Your authority? I asked. Linda, you're an elected volunteer. You don't have authority to fine residents, issue liens, or collect money for phantom assessments. I turned to address the room. According to our management company, everything Linda has done is not only unauthorized, but potentially criminal. Linda grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I don't have to listen to this witch hunt. Actually, I called after her, you do, because I've already filed complaints with the State Attorney General's office and the county prosecutor. They're very interested in HOA fraud cases. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle. Oh, and Linda, the $5,000 you tried to fine me, the state considers that attempted extortion. That's a felony. The door slammed behind her, but the real fireworks started the next morning. I was getting ready for work when my phone started buzzing. Text after text from neighbors who'd been at the meeting. David, this is crazy. Linda tried to fine us $800 last year for our mailbox being the wrong shade of black. She threatened to foreclose on our house over a garden gnome. My husband almost paid her $1,200 for a driveway stain violation that doesn't exist. It was like opening floodgates. For years, residents had been quietly paying Linda's fraudulent fines, too intimidated to fight back. Now they were all coming forward. Sarah found me at the kitchen table with my laptop, surrounded by papers and printouts. You look like you're planning a military operation, she said, pouring herself coffee. Close, I replied. I'm planning Linda's complete legal destruction. See, what I hadn't told the community yet was just how deep Linda's corruption ran. The fake fines were just the tip of the iceberg. Through my investigation, I'd discovered that Linda had been operating what essentially amounted to a protection racket. Pay her fake fines quietly, and she'd leave you alone. Question her authority, and suddenly your property would be hit with violation after violation until you either paid up or moved away. I'd found 17 families who'd been systematically targeted over the past 4 years. The total amount stolen? Over $73,000. But Linda's biggest mistake wasn't the fake fines. It was what she'd done with the money from that $200,000 landscaping contract that never happened. Remember Robert Morrison Landscaping? Turns out they'd been billing the HOA for completed work on projects that existed only on paper. Ghost invoices for phantom landscaping. And Linda had been approving every fraudulent payment. The most egregious example was a $35,000 bill for irrigation system upgrade that supposedly happened 6 months ago. I'd walked every inch of our community. There was no new irrigation system, but there was a brand new Mercedes in Linda's driveway. That Wednesday afternoon, I got a call that changed everything. Mr. Chen, this is Detective Martinez with the County Financial Crimes Unit. We understand you have information about HOA fraud in your community. Apparently, one of the neighbors had contacted the police after Tuesday's meeting. Within hours, I was sitting in a sterile conference room, laying out 2 years' worth of evidence on a metal table. Detective Martinez was a short, intense woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. She listened without interruption as I walked through Linda's scheme. "This is exceptional documentation," she said finally. "Most HOA fraud cases fall apart because victims don't keep records, but you've built a federal case here." "Federal?" I asked. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering. Your HOA president just graduated from small-time scammer to federal criminal." That evening, I called an emergency board meeting. This time, Linda didn't show up, but her husband Robert did, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Look, David," he said as neighbors filed into the clubhouse. "Maybe we can work something out. Linda's under a lot of stress. She made some poor decisions, but we can make this right." "Robert," I said quietly, "your wife stole $73,000 from our neighbors. She threatened families with foreclosure over violations she invented. She turned our community into her personal ATM machine." His face crumpled. "We'll pay it back, every penny." "That's between you and the federal prosecutor," I replied. The meeting that night was unlike anything our community had ever seen. Neighbor after neighbor stood up to share their stories of Linda's abuse. Mrs. Peterson, an 82-year-old widow, broke down crying as she described paying $900 for a lawn maintenance violation while she was recovering from hip surgery. "I was so scared she'd take my house," she sobbed. "I gave her my grocery money." Tom Bradley, a retired veteran, stood up next. "She fined me $600 for having my American flag up during a windstorm. Said it was creating an eyesore. I served this country for 20 years, and she tried to fine me for flying my flag." The stories kept coming. A young mother who'd been fined $400 for her children's toys being visible in the yard. A disabled man who'd been threatened with foreclosure for not being able to edge his sidewalk perfectly straight due to his condition. By the end of the night, we documented over $80,000 in fraudulent fines and phantom charges. The room was electric with anger and relief. These people had been carrying this burden for years, too ashamed or frightened to speak up. As the crowd dispersed, Janet Torres pulled me aside. "David, we want you to run for HOA president." "I appreciate that," I said. "But right now, I'm focused on making sure Linda faces consequences." "That's exactly why we need you." 3 days later, the FBI raided Linda and Robert Morrison's house. I watched from my window as agents carried out boxes of documents, computers, and financial records. Linda was led away in handcuffs, her famous authority bun disheveled, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. The local news picked up the story that evening. HOA president arrested in $100,000 fraud scheme. The reporter interviewed several neighbors, but they kept coming back to one question. How did you catch her? I declined to be interviewed, but Sarah did speak to the reporter. My husband is methodical, she said simply. When someone tries to bully him, he doesn't get mad. He gets thorough. The investigation revealed even more shocking details. Linda had been running similar scams in 2 previous communities before moving to Willowbrook. She'd perfected her system over nearly a decade, targeting homeowners who were deployed military, elderly, or simply too trusting to fight back. Robert Morrison's landscaping company was a shell. He had no business license, no insurance, and no actual landscaping equipment. The work he'd been billing for was entirely fictional. The Mercedes, the kitchen renovation, their son's private school tuition, all paid for with money stolen from their neighbors. The aftermath was swift and thorough. The board voted unanimously to remove Linda as president. The management company launched an audit that revealed even more financial irregularities. Robert Morrison Landscaping lost all their HOA contracts when the no-bid arrangements came to light. 6 months later, Linda Morrison was charged with federal fraud, extortion, racketeering, and embezzlement. She pled guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, plus full restitution to affected homeowners. Robert received 3 years for his role in the conspiracy. The HOA recovered over $127,000 in stolen funds and fraudulent contracts. Every resident who'd been victimized received full restitution plus interest. Mrs. Peterson used her refund to take her first vacation in 15 years. But the most satisfying moment came 6 weeks after Linda's arrest. I was checking my mail when a certified letter arrived from the federal prosecutor's office. Inside was a check for $5,847, my fraudulent fine plus damages and interest. I walked back to the house where Sarah was gardening, following Linda's old landscaping guidelines to the letter. Honey, I said, holding up the check, want to go pick out some unauthorized garden gnomes? The ripple effects of Linda's downfall continued for months. 3 other HOA communities where the Morrisons had operated came forward with similar stories. Turns out, Linda and Robert had been running this scam across 5 different neighborhoods over 8 years. They'd stolen an estimated $400,000 total. Detective Martinez called me personally to thank me for the documentation. Your case broke open the biggest HOA fraud ring we've ever seen in this county, she said. But the most unexpected call came from a woman named Jennifer Walsh in Phoenix. Mr. Chen, you don't know me, but I read about your case online. Linda Morrison did the exact same thing to my family 3 years ago when my husband was deployed to Iraq. Jennifer's story was heartbreaking. Linda had fined them $3,200 for unauthorized holiday decorations, Christmas lights that violated no actual HOA rules. When Jennifer couldn't pay immediately, Linda threatened foreclosure. I thought it was my fault, Jennifer said through tears. I thought I'd somehow violated the rules and was too stupid to understand them. Jennifer, I said, you were targeted specifically because your husband was deployed. Linda knew you were vulnerable and isolated. That conversation changed everything for me. This wasn't just about recovering my money anymore. This was about protecting families from predators like Linda Morrison. As for me, I was elected to the board on a platform of transparency and accountability. My first act was implementing a digital system that tracks all communications and decisions, making another Linda Morrison impossible. We established a resident advocacy program where anyone facing HOA issues could get free legal consultation. We created an anonymous reporting system for potential abuse. Most importantly, we limited any single person's authority. No more one-person rule like Linda's regime. The transformation was remarkable. Property values actually increased when word spread that we'd cleaned house. Prospective buyers saw our transparency measures as a selling point, not a burden. The final twist came just last month. I received a certified letter that made me laugh out loud. It was from Linda Morrison herself, writing from federal prison. David, the letter began in her familiar handwriting. I want you to know that I never intended for things to escalate the way they did. I made mistakes, and I've had 2 years to think about the pain I caused our neighbors. I'm writing to formally apologize and to tell you something important. There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank under my maiden name, Box 247. The key is taped under the drawer in my old desk. Inside that box are records of HOA fraud operations in 12 other communities across 3 states. Families are still being victimized by people using my methods. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe this information can help you stop others. This morning, Sarah and I drove to the bank with Detective Martinez and a court order. Box 247 contained exactly what Linda had promised, a treasure trove of evidence documenting a network of HOA fraud that stretched across the entire region. Names, addresses, methods, financial records. It was like finding the master playbook for community corruption. Detective Martinez spread the documents across the bank's private viewing room table and shook her head. David, this could be the biggest HOA fraud bust in state history. We're talking about potentially hundreds of victims and millions in stolen funds. As we drove home from the bank, my phone started ringing. The first call was from Marcus Webb, the attorney from California who'd hired me as a consultant last year. David, I just got a call from Detective Martinez. She says you found evidence of operations in 12 communities. 3 of those are in my jurisdiction. We need to coordinate a multi-state task force. The second call was from a reporter at the Washington Post. Somehow, news of the discovery had already leaked. Mr. Chen, we understand you've uncovered what might be the largest HOA fraud network in American history. Would you be willing to go on record? By evening, our quiet street was lined with news vans. Federal agents were coordinating with local police departments across 3 states. Sarah and I watched from our living room window as reporters set up lights and cameras on the sidewalk. You realize this is never going to end, don't you? She said, not unkindly. I looked at the documents spread across our coffee table, addresses of communities where families were probably being victimized right now, just like we had been. Good, I said. Some fights are worth finishing completely. Tomorrow, I'd be flying to Washington to meet with federal prosecutors. The war against HOA corruption was about to go national. Sometimes the biggest fights choose you, even when you never wanted to fight at all. But when they do, the only choice is to fight smart, fight thorough, and fight until justice is served. And sometimes, when someone tries to bully you with fake authority, the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting methodical. Linda Morrison learned that lesson the hard way, and now, even from prison, she's helping us take down a dozen more operations just like hers.